Chapter 68, The Bargain, Revisited, Antony's POV. Apologizing to Edgy had been just as excruciating as Antony had feared it would be, but he felt a little better now that it was done. One down, how many more to go? He could never apologize to everyone he'd ever hurt, of course. Most of them were dead, and his regrets would mean nothing to them. They likely meant nothing to the living, either, but it was better to have it done than to leave it undone. He'd left far too many things undone already. As he walked away from Felix's rooms, Antony's exhaustion was tinged with a touch of optimism. He finally seemed to be finding a bit of balance. He could be tough and in control in public without being callous in private. It was the equilibrium his father had never been able to manage, but after all these years he was finally getting the hang of it. His somberly hopeful mood was shattered when he heard Hanyu's high, tight voice, the one he used when he was distressed. Antony's first thought was, "What's upsetting him and how should I kill it?" His second thought was, "What is he doing down here? Isn't he supposed to be exercising?" His final thought was, "That's coming from Marcus's room." There weren't any more coherent thoughts after that. Antony sprinted the last few steps and hurled through the door, not knowing yet what he expected to find. Marcus turned to look as soon as the door crashed open. He was standing at the doorway of his bedroom, his eyebrows raised and a small smile on his face. "My goodness," he said when he saw Antony. "I'm terribly popular today." Antony flew the next few steps into the room, from which vantage he could see Hanyu and Asao huddled side by side in picture-perfect bows. His protective fury faded into confusion. What in the world? "What's going on here?" Antony was proud of the authoritative tone he had mustered despite his bewilderment. Asao didn't budge at the sound of his voice, but Hanyu flinched. Antony could almost feel his offerings battle to keep from peeking up at him. "My question exactly," Marcus said coolly. "All I've heard so far is a great deal of yelling about whose fault it is, which isn't exactly illuminating." "Please, my lords, Asao didn't do anything," Hanyu cried, only slightly muffled by the carpet. "I came charging in here without even knocking. He didn't let me in or anything." "Oh, fuck, Hanyu, what have you gotten us into now?" Antony tried for a menacing growl. "I'll deal with this myself. Hanyu!" "Darling, you can't possibly think I'd fall for that routine twice, can you?" Marcus smirked. "I'm almost insulted." No, he really hadn't expected it to work. It had been worth a shot, though. "Your pampered little pet burst into my private rooms without an invitation," Marcus continued. "I'm the aggravated party here. You know how I value my privacy." That was true. Even after all their years together, Antony would never have come in without knocking. What had possessed his offering? "Of course, my love." He wasn't quite pleading, not yet, but he suspected that would come soon enough. "I can't begin to tell you how sorry I am for this intrusion." Marcus was unmoved. "You understand that I am well within my rights to demand that the boy receive some kind of punishment." That was the whole trouble. He was within his rights. There was precedent. The offerings usually behaved flawlessly, but on occasion one had caused offense to a vampire other than his master. If the two vampires couldn't work it out between themselves, Antony would be called in to judge. If Hanyu had belonged to someone else, Antony would certainly have ruled in Marcus's favor in this instance and ordered the young man's master to punish him. Hanyu had trespassed in Marcus's rooms. He was clearly in the wrong. The trouble was that there was no way this punishment could proceed. Antony just couldn't use a paddle or a cane on Hanyu in front of Marcus, who was unlikely to permit any kind of leniency. And thanks to Asao's loose tongue, Marcus would certainly demand to watch the whole thing. As for turning the young man over to Marcus for his punishment, well, that simply wasn't going to happen. Antony tried to keep a dignified tone. "Yes, of course, darling. I understand. But really, I'm the one at fault for letting him run so wild." A muffled sob from Hanyu nearly undid all his efforts to stay calm. "Oh, Annie!" Marcus turned wide eyes on him. "I would never blame you for your offerings behavior. Surely you don't think I'm so unfair?" "Not unfair. No, of course not. Damn it. I just need to take responsibility for my own part in this unpleasantness." Marcus wasn't listening. If anything, it's the priest's at fault. After all, you've only had him for 2 months. They had the rest of his life to teach him common courtesy, and they seem to have failed abysmally. Do you remember his first day when he spat eggs all over your table and you came to ask me and Theo if we thought training standards had slipped? Antony tried to contain his urge to wince. Why did Marcus have to bring that up right in front of Hanyu? They had bigger problems at the moment, of course, but it was still sure to wound his offering. Hanyu took pride in his temple training, even if he often fell short of it. Regardless, he belongs to me, and his errors are my responsibility. Now the begging started. Marcus, love, please. I'm sure you and I can work something out between the two of us. Of course, Annie, the bigger vampire soothed, grasping Antony's hands and giving it a gentle squeeze. You're his master, not me. As long as the punishment you propose is appropriate for the gravity of this insult, I see no reason to make a public complaint. Antony's mind raced. I could forbid him from going above deck for a week. If he's going to abuse the freedom of movement, he'll be deprived of it. Don't be ridiculous. The gleam in Marcus's eyes showed just how much he was enjoying this, and Antony felt his fragile hopes shriveling. A week? That's hardly a deterrent. What about a month? That would be unhealthy, Antony shook his head. He could apologize to you publicly? Marcus barked a laugh. Unless your intention is to have him apologize with his sweet little ass, no, that won't do either. No! Antony's voice came out as a yelp. I've told you, he's not available for your use. Certainly not as a punishment. Gods, what was all this doing to Hanyu? Antony didn't dare to look at him fully, but he could feel the two offerings' tension like a physical force. He had to resolve this quickly and get Hanyu home to their own little rooms where Antony could hold his offering and protect him from everything and probably scream at him for getting them into this mess. Won't you even consider it? There was that gleam in Marcus's eye again. You could stay and watch to make sure I don't get carried away. Who knows? Maybe we could even entice you to join in. Antony pounced on the idea. Why include him at all? You know I can make it good for you all on my own, darling. I'd be happy to do anything you wanted, anything at all, if you could just be kind enough to overlook this whole incident. He'd thought he was doing a good job of manufacturing a seductive tone, but Marcus burst out in shocked laughter, and Antony fell silent. You're begging for your punishment, aren't you? Marcus gasped out at last. Just like one of them! Antony was glad he couldn't flush anymore, no matter how sharply he felt the shame of having to plead and grovel like this in front of Hanyu. What must he think of me? If that's how you want to think of it, he growled, nails digging sharply into his palms. Marcus's eyes were almost unbearably light in his handsome face as he leaned closer to Antony, the huddled offering seeming to be totally forgotten for the moment. Oh, no, my love, he breathed. I wouldn't want to misunderstand. Are you asking me to punish you instead of your offering? Yes! Why was he drawing this out when he knew perfectly well what Antony was doing? Why was he toying with him? Marcus's eyes flashed with what looked like victory. Then ask properly. Hanyu is never going to look at me the same way again. Please, Marcus, Antony grated out, his throat suddenly thick and his eyes stinging. Please be good enough to punish me for this infraction. I would take it as a great personal favor. Hanyu's wail hit him like the icy slap of a wave. But it's my fault! His offering had risen to his knees, and his face was drenched in tears and snot. The skin around his huge brown eyes had been cried red and raw, and his hands were clasped imploringly. Hanyu, shut up. Just let me handle this. Oh, really? Marcus purred, stooping to look into the young man's tear-stained face. Does this mean I'll finally get to learn why you felt you were allowed to come tearing into my private rooms, little one? Damn, he had a point. Antony hadn't even let his offering explain himself. He just launched right into damage control. Maybe Hanyu had an excellent reason, something that would have rendered this whole excruciating, humiliating ordeal unnecessary if he just let the young man speak. He didn't have to try very hard to make his voice stern. "Hanyu, it's time to explain yourself." "Yes, my lord," the young man whimpered. "It's just that I was worried. Asao didn't come up to exercise with the rest of us, and some of the others were saying that they'd heard screaming back before the storm." Screaming? Antony's eyes shifted to Asao, who was still huddled in his perfect bow, unmoving. He whirled to look at Marcus. "Is that true?" His lover shrugged. "So what if it is?" "I told you not to break him." "He's not broken." Marcus rolled his eyes. "He's fine. Asao, raise your head so our fearsome lord and master can see for himself." Asao obeyed. He wasn't broken, true enough, but Antony didn't think he would have used the word fine. The young man was pale, which only made the vicious bruises wreathing his throat and wrists stand out more strongly. His hands shook a little where they rested demurely on his knees, and one of the fingers were swollen and bent at a slight angle. He kept his eyes submissively downcast, but Antony could see how hollowed and dull they had grown. Had it always been this bad? Had Marcus treated them all this way? Or had Antony brought all this suffering on this poor man because he'd reacted so strongly that first time? Was all this his doing? "See?" Marcus's bored tone punctuated his horror. "He's fine." Antony's voice came out low and hard. "Marcus, what the fuck? You can't be this rough with him." Marcus scoffed. "I've been rougher with you. If I'm not mistaken, you were just pleading with me to be rougher with you." "That's different. I can take it. If you keep going like this, you'll kill him." Hanyu let out a low moan at this, but Asao didn't even blink. Antony's gut twisted at the sight of his perfect stillness. "So what if I do?" Marcus's gaze was fixed on him now, sharp and intent. "He's mine." How he had cried the first time he killed an offering. How he had sobbed in Antony's arm, wailing over and over that it had been an accident. When had this change begun? Antony was in no place to judge, he supposed. He'd been traumatizing his offerings for centuries without even realizing it. He would have gone on doing it indefinitely if Hanyu and Felix hadn't shown him the error of his ways. That was what he needed to do for his lover now. He could help Marcus the way they had helped him. Antony grabbed the bigger vampire's hands and stared up into his eyes. "Not yours to kill, Marcus," he said. "He serves you in exchange for your protection, and he serves you beautifully. You've said as much yourself, so you owe it to him to hold up your end of that bargain." "I will not be dictated to about my use of what is mine." Marcus's voice had gone hard and icy. Well, that was familiar as well. Antony had resisted the idea that he'd been doing harm at first. Surely, with a little more time, Marcus would come to understand. But Asao might not have a little more time. The bruises on his throat worried Antony. A human's throat was so unbearably fragile. The slightest bit of carelessness... "Yes, you will." Antony's voice could match his lover's for iciness. "This is my ship, and from the moment he set foot on it, Asao was under my protection as well as yours. If he dies in your care, I will hold you personally responsible, and there will be consequences." "That's not how it works," Marcus spat. "We have rules, and you can't just change them because you feel like it." "Where is the rule that says you're allowed to murder an offering within a season of getting him?" Antony kept his voice strong, but oh, it was a struggle not to quell before that rage. "I'm sure Felix would be more than happy to help me devise and enforce an appropriate punishment for that kind of wastefulness." He felt a little guilty for bringing Felix into this whole sordid mess, but if there's one vampire on the ship who Marcus might regard with fear, Antony suspected it would be the one he'd been drilling in all his best moves since before the curse. Sure enough, Marcus's jaw shut with a harsh snap that drew another shaky whimper from Hanyu. "Very well, my lord," the bigger vampire said. His voice was low, silky, perfectly controlled. His smile was back, sliding over his face and dimpling his cheeks, but his hands, which were still locked with Antony's, bore down with sudden savagery. Antony kept his cry locked tight in his belly as those fingers gripped tighter, tighter, and something in his left hand snapped and sent pain flaming up his arm. I just need to see him through this. I need to believe in him, like Felix and Theo and Hanyu did for me. I can help him if I can just be patient. I think you and your pet should leave now, Marcus continued in that same even tone. But I'll see you when the sun goes down tonight. Come back here, and I'll grant your request. After all, you asked so nicely.